Today's guest is Sophia Jones. She is an undergraduate at Stanford University, pursuing a BS in astrophysics and eventual master's in public policy. She currently is a policy intern of Space for Humanity. She also is policy co-lead and financial officer at the Sandford Student Space Initiative. I'm Felix Tuchinski, and this is Humanity and Beyond. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
Busy, but it's good. So, would you like to introduce yourself? Anything that you would like to say right off the bat that you feel like you need to get out in this?
Sure. I guess I can say a few major things about myself. My name is Sophia. I am currently going into my sophomore year at Stanford University. I am a former NASA intern, current policy intern for a nonprofit called Space for Humanity. So there's a little history behind my transition from NASA work to nonprofit work. As far as space goes, I'm also involved in the Stanford Space Initiative, which is the biggest student group on campus. It's about 300 students, I think. We do all sorts of space things. I'd love to tell you more about that. I'm majoring in astrophysics with an intention to get a master's degree in public policy. My biggest interest and passion at this point is space policy. Unfortunately, since it's so new and so it's just like something that hasn't really existed for a long time. There aren't a whole lot of programs that are specific to space policy. So I'm sort of having to make and put together my majors in a way that makes me prepared to do something like that, because there isn't like a specific space policy major.
Yeah. So that's a good lead into one of my questions is, wasn't this all figured out with the space treaty back in 1963?
Interesting that you asked that. So the space treaty back in 1963 was a really good step in the right direction, because basically what they saw is that space is this shared communal thing that no one country, one nation in the world has their own rights to. So they saw this coming, where we are going to have to figure out how can we share it and what are the rules and what are the do's and don'ts of space. The problem is that it was very, very vague. And I'm sure maybe you've read the entire space treaty, maybe you haven't. Personally, I have, but that was just out of research purposes. And there's a lot of very ambiguous wording in there about things relating to or pertaining to colonization, things about how can you use resources, things about what can you take and when can't you take. And so the biggest takeaway from the space treaty, I would say, is that it was maybe 30 to 35% of what we needed. But looking at today, where we've got a private industry for space, which is, I don't think, something they really saw coming. I think when the space treaty was written, they mostly envisioned space programs that were overseen by national governments. So now we have these private businesses, we have SpaceX, we have Virgin Galactic, all these things that are shooting for a commercial space flight. And that's not just unique to the US too. The world has this huge push for doing more in space. And what's happening is the only existing literature that we have on the UN side that's really bulky, that UN space treaty, is just so underwritten and underdeveloped that it's kind of a free-for-all. And I say that with moderation, because there are, of course, some things around, you can't use the air of other countries. You can't just shoot a rocket through another person's quote unquote air territory.
Airspace?
To be honest, no one really does that anyways. But yeah, the space treaty was just the first step into this big legislative challenge of deciding what is allowed in space and what is not. And so I would say the biggest challenge today is that we're kind of behind, because what's happening is that there's a lot of countries trying to do different things in space. Even the United States, there's a lot of companies who have different goals, different visions for what they want to do with space. Some people are super into terraforming Mars, and other ones are please don't mess with Mars at all. And so there's just no real rules around it. And so everyone's just kind of doing what they want. And that's where space policy has to really catch up and get ahead, is figure out what's going on and kind of come to a consensus about what are we going to do.
Gotcha. So like you said, you're part of the Stanford Student Space Initiative. I saw that there was a whole section devoted to Mars, right? And using Martian technologies that we did, for example, a good example that is probably pretty obvious is it's pretty hard to grow stuff on Mars. If we can figure out how to grow stuff on Mars easily, probably a mix of GMOs and some other hydroponic technologies, we can then apply that on Earth. And in fact, you guys are advocating that needs to be applied on Earth. And what policy would govern that really? Because I guess that's a more specific aspect of like you just said, it's difficult. It's a free for all. You probably have a vague vision of you in the future deciding what the space policy is. So what would you say to somebody to so let's for let's say private space company A's got private colony. They develop these GMOs. Is that patent protected? Is it? I mean, is it up to them if they decide to open source it? Is it not patented regardless? Because the Outer Space Treaty says that everything in space is owned by everybody, and this patent would have been made in space, but then it's also a private company.
Yeah. So basically, the way that I see it, as far as any sort of decision making for space policy, it's almost like US politics, where it's basically like a spectrum that's one dimensional. You're on the left or you're on the right. Okay, maybe it's on like one side or the other. I won't use the words left and right because those have a lot of weight. But basically, the way that I see it is there's a lot of people who advocate for a very peace-driven space. It's a lot about exploration, the overview effect, unity, this sense of hope, this beacon of inspiration, that sort of thing. On the other end, there's a lot more people who are involved in like the space force type of thing. They're seeing space as a potential way for nations to go to war or just conflicts in general. A lot of emphasis on like just doing things for your own country, not a whole lot of emphasis on doing things for everybody. And the problem that I have with that logic that typically arises is that I don't really think it's mutually exclusive. And so to answer your question about, should Mars GMOs be like patent protected? Are people allowed to just do things on their own versus for everyone? I think that you can achieve a balance. I think it's very fair to say that yes, the United States could take our portion of Mars. We could take a little section of it, call it ours, do whatever we want, make it not open source, like it's just for us, but also have a way to share that with other people, making it important that if you're doing something privately or you're doing something without sharing it with other nations, that it be to the benefit of other nations as well, or at least not as a consequence. Like if we were going to Mars, colonizing, using the resources, doing whatever we felt like doing, and that harmed JAXA and their research that's 20 miles away. It harmed Nigeria and the rockets that they're hoping to send up in like however many years. Like those kinds of things, I personally don't think we should be doing. I think the biggest goal for space should be you can use space in the way that you like as long as it doesn't affect other people's ability to do that in the future or currently. And I agree that that's a very vague statement because to a lot of people that means a lot of different things. But I think in general, the focus on you and everybody and not just you or everybody is the right approach to space policy.
Right. So that leads into correct me if I'm wrong. You're doing research in DEI, right? That's diversity, equality, and inclusion. Okay, yeah. So I just wanted to confirm that with you. So, and you mentioned JAXA. So, coincidentally enough, Crew One is going to have a Japanese astronaut, and I was wondering, is that so? Does your inclusive research sort of revolve around just getting more people from more countries in space, or does it involve getting more space independence for other countries? For example, India is hoping to by next year. It may be delayed now, of course, but is hoping to soon achieve independent launch capability, which so far has only been achieved by the United States, Russia, and China. So is that more what you're researching
I
into?
would say that's sort of an element to it of making sure that other countries can be involved in space. But I think the general gist of my research for diversity is more about the people who are in the space industry. So that talks about like diversifying these astronaut missions, diversifying who gets to go to space, diversifying who is involved in the space industry. NASA isn't typically known for having the most diverse workforce. So I really just focus on what prevents minorities and these underrepresented communities from wanting to join the space industry because in general, and like I'm sure you can attest to this, space is just so special. Like it really just has its own magic that not a lot of other industries can say that they have. You can literally look up at the stars and just be engulfed by this feeling of like, wow, space is crazy, it's great. And that's not just unique to us. And so because there's this sort of magic to space, it ought to be shared and experienced by as many people as possible. Whether they're simply like enjoying space as like a civilian, or they're working there in a space industry, or they're literally an astronaut to go into space. Like space has to be for everybody. And what I talk about in my paper is why isn't it? What is preventing people from feeling that way?
So, in a nutshell, it's providing the overview effect to as many people from as many different races, genders, colors, creeds as possible.
Yeah, I would say that's a big focus. And obviously, the paper that I'm writing is written from the perspective of Space for Humanity, which is the place I'm interning for, and that is their whole mission: is to make the overview effect, make the magic of space available to everybody, regardless of your race, your gender, your sexuality, socioeconomic status, all of that. But I also spend a good part of my paper talking about why diversity really will drive innovation in space, because space work requires big brains, like it requires smart people. And I talk a lot about why including people from all walks of life, including people who might not necessarily study the specific thing but have a very valuable perspective to bring to the table, all of that stuff is really important to an effective innovative industry.
Hmm. So, what suggestions would you have to the NASA? So, 'cause NASA's doing their final round from in 2019. They did they I don't even know what you would call it. They just kind of said on their website and publicly like, "Hey, we're hiring new astronauts." Like the requirements are basically have a master's in a STEM field and be physically fit. Those were the only two qualifications that were the big ones. What would you? And obviously, they have a bunch of stuff internally that they're not going to say out to the public. How much do you know about that process, and what recommendations would you give to NASA?
Yeah, so I'm going to be completely honest and say that I don't know a whole lot about the astronaut process. Like, I know basically as much as anybody else can tell by a quick Google search. Like, I have no ins into how they pick.
Mm.
I think they try and keep that pretty private on purpose. But there are two types of people that I think NASA really needs to try and get into space soon. The first type, they need a queer astronaut. Like, there is no secret about that. In the entire history of NASA astronauts ever, 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 there's only been one, Sally Ride, and she was not outwardly gay when she went to space. It wasn't until after she died that it was publicly known that she was. And that's a huge misrepresentation of the United States today. And that's a huge opportunity for them to send a role model into space that could really serve as a source of inspiration for the whole LGBTQ plus community of youth, of people in STEM. So that's number one. I think they need to get a queer astronaut. As number two is I think they need to experiment a little bit more with religious diversity. And what I mean by that is that we have never seen an astronaut go to space in a spacesuit that can be worn while wearing a hijab. Like these sorts of things, I'm not sure if it's just an unintentional bias that they have, or there really haven't really been that many qualified people who make it that far. But I think they need to focus on getting different types of people into space. They have been doing a pretty good job of racially diversifying their space forces and their astronaut classes, and I'll give them that. But I think that there's more work that they can do. So my recommendation for NASA is send up a queer astronaut and send up an astronaut that wears a hijab.
We'll be right back. We just want to thank all our listeners and especially our supporters. Without you, all this would not be possible. If you want to support us, you can do so just by following and sharing on social media. Coming up is our community question. If you want the chance to have your question featured, just tweet @HumanityXBeyond. I am surprised it hasn't been talked about more. Maybe it'll be the closer the date is set. There's the whole argument of who will be the first person to set foot on Mars. Here's the thing: is it's like obviously that person will have to be incredibly qualified because that's 6 months of flight time, and then they have to be physically fit enough to take a step after spending 6 months of microgravity. Versus how inclusive should we be to make sure that person is not just another white guy?
Exactly. I've heard some things from NASA, and I'm not sure if these are official or just from like NASA employees that say it off the record, but I'm pretty sure they're trying to make the first person on Mars to be a woman, a female, which is a really good start, I think, because it's always been about the first man on the moon, the first man on the moon. And like the first woman on Mars would be like a really good juxtaposition to that. But I agree with you. I don't think that it's hard to achieve a balance between discriminating against talent and trying to be diversity forward. And this is not unique to the space industry. This goes for, the affirmative action conversation around universities. That's been a thing that's been going on for decades around if you have two qualified individuals, and one of them is more diverse than the other one, and you want to increase your diversity, like, is it ethical to choose them? And is it ethical to choose them if they maybe aren't as qualified? Like that's a whole conversation that's so non-unique to the space industry. But I think that it's time that they sort of get involved with that conversation, because I think that they need to refocus on who will be the first woman in space. Like, are we shooting for someone who's going to represent us in a way that is more diverse, or are we just going to choose the person who is straight out the most talented and that's it? So it's kind of a hard balance, but I would love to see a woman to be the first person on Mars. Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Yeah. I mean, it's in NASA's the next man and the first woman on the moon for the Artemis program. So I guess they're certainly headed in that direction. And now I just wanted to get more from your perspective. How did you end up at Stanford?
Oh, that's a good question. And it's kind of a funny story, actually. So I kind of had my eyes on like these Ivy League schools and like MIT, stuff like that, since I was a little bit earlier in my high school career, but I hadn't really set my eyes on Stanford for a while. And so when I was applying to schools, there's like this rule where you can only apply to one of them early, and then the rest you have to apply to regular. So I had to pick one. And my mom and I decided that I should pick the one that has the lowest acceptance rate. That way, if I get rejected, like, it won't hurt my feelings. Like, I still have a chance at all of the other ones. It's not a big deal. I threw my hat in the ring and it didn't get picked. And then I did get picked. And that was the only school I applied to. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is crazy. So I was over the moon excited. I remember just the feeling of opening up that letter, because my parents did not attend like crazy great schools like that. And I didn't go to a private school. Like, I was the first person from my school to ever go to Stanford. Like, it was just a huge deal for me. But it was an easy yes, because I knew that it was a very innovative centric school. I liked how progressive and forward they were with their thinking and their education, and just the way that they handled their philosophy around learning. And so that was really what sealed the deal for me. Besides the fact that at the time it was the only school I applied to, but yeah, that's kind of how I ended up there.
I guess there's not really. I've heard Boulder, Colorado is another one. There's no real like, because there's like schools that you go to for business. Like if you want to get into law, you go to Harvard. If you want to get into business, you probably go to Berkeley. But there's no like astrophysics space engineer school other than maybe MIT, but that's more
The
computers.
thing with a lot of the Ivy Leagues and other kinds of schools like that is that when you look up like the top 10 or top 5 or whatever, they're usually cycling. Like, you never see constantly one at the top, except for maybe MIT, but it just depends. Um, so yeah, but I just really liked the environment there. I thought that there was a lot of potential for me there, and I'm really glad that I did, because I found the Stanford Space Initiative while I was there, and that has completely changed my life. So it was a good choice.
Last question: Would you go to Mars?
I mean, I would love to be a pioneer. I think it would be awesome to be one of the first people there. But I think that there are people who deserve to go before me. I'm just recognizing that from the spot that I'm in. I think that before they would send me, I would love to see someone who comes from a very low income family who never even dreamed of having that sort of opportunity. Like, just all these sorts of role models and people who have had to overcome a whole lot. I would have no problem with them going before me. So I think it's a thing of like, yeah, I would be like first in line as soon as I can, but like, I don't want to take that opportunity away from someone else who deserves it more, because I recognize that I might not deserve it the most. So
So, is there anything else you'd like to say, mention, talk about?
I can't really think of anything specific. No.
No, we're good. Oh, yeah. How was being an intern at NASA?
Oh, yeah. So that was a crazy experience. I was brought on to a geospatial team, so I did some work with software development. Um, to be completely transparent, that was a lot for me, because I had literally never done software development in my life. Like, I had no idea what programming was about. Um, I was familiar with ArcGIS. I had done that a little bit in high school. I did a project with it. And that's why I got hired on. But the second day that I was there, they said, let's do JavaScript instead. Let's not do ArcGIS. And I responded, what? But it was an awesome experience. I really enjoyed just being around people from NASA. It just felt so surreal. I was at NASA Ames Research Center, which is about a 20-minute train ride away from Stanford, which was nice. And I loved just seeing all these different people working on crazy projects, like just for a living. They were just normal people. I mean, like kind of nerdy, but that's to be expected. They offered me an extension near the end to keep working on my project. I was working on creating a digital globe so that we could test lunar imagery on it, basically seeing like how we can adapt it so it's like one globe and you can put any pictures on it, because pictures are taken differently with different dimensions. So that was sort of my project. I was offered an extension near the end, but I decided to decline because I don't know. I just wasn't really sure if software development was for me. And I wanted to be, I think having that experience of working at a desk and doing a lot of software, computer things in my like individual office, doors shut, like flickering government light, I realized that I wanted to be somewhere a lot more on the front of the space industry and pioneering what can we do and what happens. And I think having the experience of being an intern at NASA parallel with my experience with the policy team at the Stanford Space Initiative and seeing the conversations that they were having about the way that the space industry was going, I really realized that I preferred that side, the policy and political side of the space industry, as opposed to the like hunched over and doing an ArcGIS project space industry kind of deal. So I really enjoyed my experience there. I'm actually like looking for a more policy related position there so I can go back. But I think what it came down to was my passion was not what I was doing. And so I had to unfortunately leave.
Gotcha. So what would be your dream job then? Because clearly, so I mean, writing policy, you've clearly recognized that you need knowledge, which is why you're getting the astrophysics major, right? So, what would be your dream job? Is it working at NASA? Is it maybe working in a governmental position over like?
Yeah, I think actually an agency that has the potential to make a big difference in this space is UNUSA, the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs. I was a hair away from being able to present to them in Vienna this year. SSI had done a project with the policy team about like sustainable space travel and how those can work kind of in conjunction with their sustainable development goals from the UN. We were going to go there, we were going to present in front of all of the delegates and everything like that. And I'm sure you can see where this is going, but we were supposed to leave the last week of March to go to Vienna. So I'll save you the COVID talk, but that was almost going to happen. And so I think that having been so close to being able to go there has made me like really eager to be there again, and maybe in a more permanent sense of experiencing how they come up with these treaties and these policies and seeing just like what the world is like there.
So, would you want to write the space treaty too? I guess I have no.
Yeah, I mean, part of me is like I would love to be involved with writing something or creating something, but at the same time, like I recognize that before I even think about doing that, I just have to learn. I have to learn. And so that is why I'm so fortunate to have like this internship with Space for Humanity, and then being able to learn about things just from my policy team, from an academic sense at school. Like before I feel comfortable with making any sort of like legislative thought, really, like I have to make sure that I know the industry, and there's so much to know about it. And I'm just constantly trying to learn more, reading more, listening to podcasts all the time. So I think like maybe a little bit down the road in a few years, when I've really gotten my bearings on not only the national space industry, but the worldwide picture of space, then I would be super down to help write a new space treaty. But I think in this moment, like as a 19-year-old undergraduate, the best thing that I can do to prepare myself for a position like that is to just keep learning.